Hey everyone, thanks a lot for joining us today. It is Friday. Thank goodness. So we are here to talk about setting up your startup for success in the cloud. So I'm going to go ahead and have you take it away.
So hi, I'm Michael. Arida. I've been working as an engineer in the cloud for many years. I spent about 5 years working for AWS, and then spent some time working for an MSP as well, as one of the lead engineers there. And so yeah, I just wanted to put this together. This is kind of geared towards pretty early stage companies that are either considering getting into the cloud or might already be dipping their toes, but not not a company that's like really big and established yet. Yeah. So I guess I'll get started. The first thing that I wanted to go over was whether you actually even should get into the cloud yet. And that's the first question I think that you should ask. A lot of people, especially technical people like myself, will just jump into what we know, and it's really easy to do that. But sometimes you don't actually need to go and build out a whole ton of cloud infrastructure and so on. Sometimes you really just need a $10 VPS just to have it up and running, let people see it, and then from there you can go and you can build it later out. You can build your infrastructure later. There's a couple things to consider. Good engineers are expensive. If you're not a technical person, if you are a technical person, you should also consider later on when you hand over the infrastructure, the person that you're going to hire. The more complex it is, the more knowledge they're going to have, and so the more expensive that person's going to be as well. And just in general, it takes away your time. Some of it is set it up once and done, but some of it you're going to have to maintain. Just stuff like that is stuff to consider. But yeah, the biggest first question I would ask is, do you even need it yet? And sometimes it's better to just go with a $10 VPS. Yeah. And then trying to decide between the cloud. And when I say cloud, I'm thinking AWS or GCP or Azure, one of the three bigger cloud providers. Technically, DigitalOcean, I guess you could consider a cloud as well. But for that, I'm more considering just, again, like the VPS route. If you're building an MVP or a proof of concept, a lot of times you just need a cheap VPS. You don't need a full-blown cloud setup, especially if you're just running a Docker container or two or something like that. When it makes sense to go to the cloud is more like when you have some traction already, when you need some more reliability, more scalability. You don't want to just have one server that's sitting there with your entire app running on it, right? That's kind of when you start to think about the cloud. And yeah, let's see. This is, you should have some kind of traction, even if it's not a paying user yet, at least some kind of proof, I think, before you go and actually start building out a bunch of infrastructure, especially more complicated infrastructure like Kubernetes and so on. One of the expensive mistakes a lot of people make too, as well, is once they get into the cloud, they build out massive amounts of infrastructure. I've done this myself. Build something, don't even have any users yet, but I built out a Kubernetes cluster and separate RDS instance and all sorts of other stuff that realistically I didn't need at the time, just because it was too early. And yeah, it slows you down, because like any time that you spend building or maintaining this infrastructure or troubleshooting it when things don't work later on is time that you could have been spent on something else. And that is pretty costly, especially early on. Yeah, like it says on the page, don't prep for 10,000 users if you are still trying to get 10 people to care. Yeah, and then when you do finally get started with the cloud, it's important to just keep things simple at first. Don't go for the most complicated and expensive thing you can build right away. Start with the basics too. you want to have proper authentication set up. Each user gets their own account. Don't just give everyone full admin, stuff like that. You want to set up some alerts because it's very easy to completely blow up your budget with AWS. They have no problem letting you spin up as many resources as you want, yeah. So just start simple and then just build it out further as you actually need it. And definitely write down and document what you're building, because when someone leaves, you don't want to have the main person that built everything leave and then you don't know how everything works for the next guy, So what I did was I put together a couple quick examples that you could have. So like in this case, for your front end hosting, right? This assumes you have like a React or Vue.js build or something that you're trying to host. And I'm using AWS for this example, but I think the other two have similar services. So in this case, you could just throw the build files into S3 and then have CloudFront actually go and distribute it. And the reason why this kind of build is pretty nice in the beginning, and honestly even later on, is S3 kind of just scales almost infinitely. It's got a proven track record. It doesn't really go down almost ever. And CloudFront is kind of the same in terms of reliability, and they have edge servers all over the world. And so your front end will load blazing fast that way. And the best part, I think at least, is it costs almost nothing, especially at start, because you're paying for the requests. And you pay like a penny or two for the storage in S3, and then you pay for the requests. So like if you're not getting any requests, you're not really getting charged much, if anything, maybe a few pennies, which is really nice. And then for the back end, so there's a lot of ways to run things in AWS. I'm going to avoid going over complicated things like ECS and EKS here. I think they're overkill, especially for something new that when you're just getting started. But here's two examples, and this assumes you're running just something really simple, a basic backend with a basic database, like a Postgres database or something. For the backend side, you could just run an EC2 instance that has the backend and the database on the same machine. It's not very scalable that way, but it's fairly cheap just to get started. Just to have it up and running so that people can see it. You can expand upon that, and you can make it a little bit more scalable, but don't make things too complicated. Like for example, in the second example, running either a single instance or using auto scaling, which allows you to have multiple instances, and it will scale out as needed based on your demand, and then a separate database instance that they all can reach. And there's different ways you can do it. I generally like to use Aurora for my database because it scales up and down as you need it. So if you don't have any traction yet, it scales all the way down and costs almost nothing. But if you do scale up later on, it'll automatically scale up. So that kind of thing is pretty nice. And that's a way to get a scalable system up and running, at least in the beginning, with very little money. And then as your demand comes in, your EC2 instances, if you're using auto scaling, you'll get more instances when you have the demand. And then like, let's say later on at night during the day, there's no traffic, it'll scale down and you'll have less instances and it'll cost a lot less. And again, these are just basic examples. There's a million ways to run things on AWS. But just getting started, simple is usually best because it's the cheapest. And also it requires the least amount of expertise. And then I had this on here because there are some mistakes that people can make that can be pretty costly with AWS. It's a very large beast. Some of the common things that I've seen, and these are pretty much the most common ones, are like choosing instance sizes without understanding the application's requirements. So like if you only have a few users and your application only needs a little bit of resources, you don't need a massive instance. I've seen cases where things were over provisioned, several times over what they needed to be. Another one is like setting up incorrect auto scaling thresholds and limits. So like you might be scaling up to more instances when you hit 30% of your CPU usage across all your servers, but that's pretty low. You don't necessarily need to scale that fast. You could set a higher limit, like 70%. Or I've also seen where people have set too many for the max amount of instances that you can scale out, and I've seen that blow up as well, because something goes wrong eventually, and the next thing you know, you have 100 servers running when you really only need 1 or 2, but there's a problem with the app or something else. So having a sane limit is very important. Leaving dev environments and stuff like that running when, even over the weekend and stuff when no one's working, that's kind of just burning money. Stuff like that. And one of the biggest things too, I think, is just not factoring in the human and time cost when considering the total cost of ownership for the cloud. Sometimes things can seem like they're going to be cheaper, but then when you realize the amount of hours that will go into it, engineers are expensive, and that can totally change the equation. Yeah. So I guess hopefully I didn't go too fast through this, but yeah. Does anyone have any questions or anything? Sure. Kaju.
Hey, Michael, that was good. Thank you. I was wondering if you could talk to the cold start problem in Lambda. And I also noticed that you talked about Aurora. What could be the other trade-offs, especially now when we're doing a lot of machine learning and stuff, like when we're using S3 vectors or something like that? Do you have any opinions on that?
For cold start with Lambda, honestly, I don't think I've dealt with that too much, because most of the stuff that I've done has been container oriented. If I recall, I could have sworn the thing to do with that was to pre-warm them, right? Honestly, I'm not sure with the Lambda. As far as Aurora goes, honestly, I just use it as for a Postgres database. I haven't done anything super complicated with it. I have done some testing in terms of like how fast it can scale and everything, and I haven't had a single problem with that. I did a bunch of research on the scalability of it, but I don't think I can answer that question, to be honest.
Yeah. So you would recommend just like containerizing things and then maybe scaling up with ECS and just putting them in containers, and then later on getting to the point where you want to scale up, you can just add a load balancer in the front and just go with that, basically.
Yeah, that's usually how I would do it. I personally tend to like Kubernetes later on. Yeah.
Would you? I know CloudFormation, it's got its drawbacks, whatever. And would you talk about like Kubernetes from the very beginning, just to like not do dashboard fatigue and just somebody leaving and not knowing what's going on?
Not quite sure what you mean, like going with Kubernetes from the beginning?
Yeah. I mean, sorry, going with Terraform from the beginning.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so honestly, I definitely prefer Terraform over CloudFormation all day long, and I think that's pretty much become the standard. CloudFormation, I tend to see that more when like when you sign up for a vendor that needs access to your AWS account, you'll see them have like a CloudFormation template to set up like an IAM role or other requirements. You can use CloudFormation if you like, but I think the main industry standard is really Terraform.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know. We're just putting it up there, so I didn't know. You were like, okay, go CloudFormation. I'm like, is there a benefit to that? Because we can write Terraform if it's a little bit more complicated, but
Yeah, Terraform tends to be a bit better, and one of the nice things about Terraform is that not just like how not just working with it in general, but there's lots of community modules you can get out there, and honestly, AI has gotten really good at writing Terraform. There are some trickier use cases you can run into where it's not so great, but those are pretty rare if you're not doing anything really crazy or special. I would definitely start with Terraform though. Terraform everything if you can. If you don't have the expertise though, it can get expensive. If you keep things simple, you can always import them later. That's one of the nice things about infrastructure as code with Terraform is that you can import your resources later. It's a pain though if you have a ton of resources, but if you keep it simple, it's not so bad, you know.
We actually use local stack to simulate, and then just try as much as we can. Sometimes it doesn't have all the APIs, but we use local stack to simulate. And yeah, I'm gonna stop talking because I'm sure there's other people. But if you have time, if you want to talk about something about multi-tenant instances versus single tenant instances. But yeah, that was it. Thank you.
Oh yeah, definitely. And yeah, one of the nice things about EKS is that you can run multiple things in different namespaces, and you can share your resources that way, which is more cost effective. The trade-off is you're going to need expertise to actually run it, and so you can run it yourself, but at some point you're going to end up having to hire someone. So you need to keep in mind that the more complex the solution is, and the more technologies you leverage, the more that person's going to need to know, and the more that person's also going to have to charge and so on. And it's going to take time to get them up to speed as well, especially if there's no documentation, which is pretty common, I think, in startups.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to get AI to write our Terraform and then document it. So hopefully we'll have something, but we'll see.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions? I guess. Siegli?
Okay, you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm working with a small team, and we have some small fine-tuned models, and we want to move from those to orchestration of multiple specialized models plus a large generalist model. How would we design the cloud infrastructure so each component scales independently and can be hot swapped, I guess, without downtime?
I'd have to look more into the requirements and how that all runs, because right off the bat, I don't understand how your application runs.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to know.
It was suggested, I think microservices was what the team came up with, or some model registry there, like MLflow. I think SageMaker was another suggestion, but I have to dig a little bit more into that. But yeah, I mean, yeah, the main problem is, but depending on the answer, I guess, because we have to ensure inference endpoints for different models. This could share like GPU resources dynamically, and and optimize the cost without kind of starving the higher priority tasks, right?
That's actually an interesting one. So, sharing the GPUs, I don't know if you can do that with Kubernetes, so that might kill Kubernetes. I'd have to look because I haven't tried to do that before.
Right.
Anytime I deal with microservice anything, I always jump straight to Kubernetes personally. But in this case, if you're trying to share GPUs and trying to be more cost effective, that might actually not be the best solution. I'd have to look into how that actually works.
That would actually help us a lot if I have an answer for these, because I know my way around AI and all this, and a little bit of all these structure, but I'm not really into cloud infrastructure. So it would be really good for me to have some answers here and kind of guide the way to better deployment down the road.
Yeah. I'd have to do a little bit of research to be able to answer that, to be honest.
Right.
Yeah, I don't want to give you false information,
Yeah, right. Maybe we follow up at some point. That would be great, man.
Okay. Let me make a note real quick.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, cool. I just made a note so I can do some research.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks.
Adam, maybe you want to ask Michael to comment on the getting started. Adam and I were just chatting via in-call messaging, Michael, FYI, about, if you're just getting started and, you haven't gone down the rabbit hole of AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, and you hit this menu with 1,000 different items that you need to order and cobble together. I just put in the chat that DigitalOcean sometimes isn't bad for sort of getting started if someone's just prototyping something and really wants to kind of scale that user base and then kind of grow. I know AWS and Google and Azure are very popular once you need to scale. But if you're doing a proof of concept or have a couple hundred users, do you maybe want to talk to that concept of, maybe AWS has a fully managed service, I think it was called SailPoint or something back in the day. But, if you're just getting started and you want to do a proof of concept or an alpha test, AWS may be a little complex or overkill if you don't have a dedicated engineer sort of available. To your point, where sometimes as part of the community, there's a couple folks that are on the business side, and then the question is, how much can you stand up on your own, by just getting a basic server hosted and running with a marketplace image, and when do you need to sort of bring in a cloud computing consultant? Maybe you can speak to that a little bit, because I think earlier on, when you're talking about RDS and Kubernetes and stuff, that's all like when you're trying to grow enterprise scale. But like you said, you don't always need to architect it like you're at Netflix if you have 50 users, because your AWS bill is going to be more than your rent.
Yeah.
And I've seen CFOs at startups have a heart attack when the engineering team started blowing up the AWS bill.
Oh yes, I have seen some crazy, some really crazy AWS bills. I've seen a $50,000 S3 spike come out of nowhere. Yeah, I would if I was just testing out to see if people even want something, or if I'm just getting started and I didn't need the infrastructure, I would definitely go with, like you said, just DigitalOcean or something similar. You could even go with AWS and just spin up an EC2 instance, the same concept. The thing is, AWS your bill will grow, even if you keep it simple. Over time, it's going to go up. Yeah, and it does add complexity. Even if you get started with it and you do keep it simple, there's still more complexity, like IAM and stuff like that, to consider. The networking setup is more complicated. So yeah, it is a good idea to if you're just getting started and you just need a bare minimum server just to run something, DigitalOcean makes a lot of sense, and it's a lot more cost effective, and it's just a lot less headache too, especially if you're not technical. If you don't know much about networking and stuff like that, you probably don't want to jump straight into AWS, because one of these other solutions you probably won't have to, it's a lot of stuff that you can just take off your plate and keep moving forward. I guess, do you have any specific questions about it, or?
No, I think, no, I didn't. I don't know, Adam, did you? I just kind of thought, your intro is really good about the AWS complexities, and Azure and Google have similar things. I think it's just more, if you need to stand up a server, how do you do that if you don't have an engineer available initially? Because, maybe you vibe coded something and you're like, hey, deploy this to Vercel. For free or cheap. Maybe you can speak to, if you don't have that engineering team yet, you want to do some product market fit and validation to, get funding to bring on engineers. Is there sort of a, do it yourself approach that you would recommend that's a little easier to onboard with a, more shallow learning curve, if you will? Because AWS, there's a learning curve, right? Because they name everything the Amazon way. And even mapping that to what the heck Microsoft calls it or Google calls it sometimes is confusing, at least for myself, even working in software.
Yeah, I think that I think what I would do is I would start off, if I was going to vibe code and just have that do most of the work for me. I would say I would start with having it Dockerized, having it running in Docker. But that way you can test it locally before you even bother trying to host it, right? And then getting it hosted on is a lot simpler, because you can basically look up any tutorial or ask an AI for instructions to set up Docker on a VPS. And migrating later on is easy too, because you're only setting up Docker basically on that host. You don't have to go and set up a bajillion different things on there, right? And so moving later on is a lot easier because it's Dockerized, and you can just move the containers onto a new host. You'll have to migrate any data still, but that's at that point, you could probably get someone to do that, or you can get instructions if you really wanted to. It's not too bad. But I would start off with Dockerizing if I'm going to vibe code something, because it's a lot easier that way.
Yep. No, that's a really good suggestion for how to port that. That was kind of Adam's question was, hey, you can start out with this $5 a month hosting, even if it's AWS, but how do you sort of package it up so that you can move it and scale it, down the road as hopefully you get more user traction. So I think your suggestion with Docker, for folks that maybe need to read up on that just a little bit more, that upgrade path sounds like it might be a good option as if you're trying to sort of do it yourself with an AI chatbot assisting you and kind of helping you out a little bit to start, and then really kind of grow it as your business takes off.
Yeah, and the nice thing too is that later on, the more complex, heavy duty services like Kubernetes and stuff, right? You're already setting yourself up for success for that later on, because you're already Dockerized. The battle's already halfway won. So that's one of the nice things too, is you're setting yourself up for future success if you go the Docker route, I think.
Yeah, and I did add the caveat that I am not a cloud guy, so that's the reason why I was asking. Just what the mitigation process was like. I've heard nightmares, so it's always good to ask and know.
And Sikli, you had a question?
Yeah, no, I was just going to add to that. I think Adam is totally right. Like, I would definitely start with DigitalOcean and don't go to AWS for now, because DigitalOcean is practically for most of the applications out there that are starting off as MVP plug and play, right? You don't need a really big infrastructure, and we learned that the hard way, because we were running some Influence layer with SageMaker and some shared multimodal endpoint there, and they were running like 12 hours a day. Of course, they were scaling down during off hours, but it cost us $23,000 a month, right? So no way. No way. I think at the beginning, yes, please don't. It's just it costs a lot of money.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, it can cost hundreds or even almost $1,000 just to run like a pretty small app when you have a really robust structure from the beginning. And if you have no users and you're paying $1,000 a month, that hurts.
It does hurt. It's just not worth it, really. Like even with a simple knowledge base vector database, you get like maybe 1.5 a month. Like that's ridiculous.
Oh yeah, definitely. You can get startup credits from like AWS, and I think Azure does the same, and I wouldn't be surprised to see GCP do the same.
Yeah, I wanted to just suggest that to folks that are looking to get started. There's usually a form, Ben, Adam, FYI, if we have enough members, they might give us a special promo code or discount offer, all the cloud computing providers. But, it's a co-marketing thing where they'll give you like a couple $1,000 in credits that you can kind of try all these services. Typically, I've seen some accelerator programs offer that. And so you can either do an individual application, or if you're part of sort of a startup, community, potentially get a community level invite code. But there are some free credits as well, so that, your first bill isn't $5,000 and you have a heart attack. They will give you some credits. You just need to make sure to maybe check your usage, because you could get sticker shock if you then burn through your credits and start, getting billed on your company card.
Michael, if you wanted to, I don't know, Kevin might be a person to talk with about this, but if you wanted to run that program for the founders group, I don't see any reason that you couldn't do that.
I'm sorry, I must have run a program.
The program Mark was talking about, like the AWS, like a version of AWS Activate.
I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I must. Are you talking about local stack or something? I'm not. I'm not. I'm sorry. I'm not quite sure what you're talking
No,
about.
I mean we can talk about this offline, but
Sorry.
I think maybe I misunderstood. But I was just saying, the founders group would love to have a program like that where we can, like what Mark was just saying, where basically if we're able to establish some kind of relationship with Amazon or whoever it is, and basically, I don't know if it's AWS Activate, but if the founders group has 500 members now, and 300 of them are in the Discord server, we could probably get some kind of dispensation ourselves. Now we're far enough along, so I don't know if you'd be interested in helping us get that started, but if you are, then
Sure. Yeah. Anything I can do to help.
sure, thank you.
Yeah, and the other tip I would say is if you get a promo, if you want to do AWS first, go, have Microsoft Azure beat their offer because it's coming out of co-marketing budget and they'll give you like $10,000 in free credits. You have to sort of apply for it, but some of the accelerator programs, will have sort of a discount code. And, they always want to get new startups on the platform. And so as you grow, of course, you're sort of locked into AWS versus Azure versus Google. So, the theory is, hey, long term, you're going to pick one and scale. But to Ben's point, they do offer some credits. Like you said, I don't think it's the official AWS program. You might need sort of a developer evangelist contact or your account rep at AWS where you're like, hey, we have a couple hundred members. They're all founders. They're building stuff. Do you have some marketing, cloud credits that you can offer to them to get going and try out your platform? And then all three basically will say, oh, that comes out of their marketing budget. And, they can throw a lot of free credits at stuff. So probably worth asking, if you're closest with the AWS solution team, first, maybe that's a good one to ask, but they all, if you're a nonprofit or a startup of a certain size scale, then you, I think, are eligible for, these promo credits. Like you maybe have to have an LLC formed or an incorporated, but there's some free credits. So you shouldn't necessarily have to burn through a giant IT budget when you're just getting started.
Yeah, and I would still try to keep costs low, even if you get the credits, because
For
eventually
sure.
credits will be gone, and you're going to continue paying whatever you're paying at the time.
Yep.
So
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, DigitalOcean is still the way to go. But I think to Ben's point, if you have a couple hundred founders, you might have some negotiating power to get some, free cloud credits with the big providers. Or Hertzner in Germany for Siegel. Ray. That's the
Right, yeah.
AWS competitor that's like
Yeah,
crushing it in
right.
Europe.
But Austria, actually.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
nothing to do with Germany. Oh, these Germans.
My bad. I apologize.
It's all good.
my family's actually visiting from Germany right now.
Really
Yep.
cool. They should go to Austria. Not Germany. We are very, very nice people, but we just don't mean it.
Vienna is great.
Yeah, I guess. Does anyone have any other questions or thoughts or anything?
Doesn't
I
seem.
had a quick question.
Oh, go ahead, Johan.
Sorry. Actually, I don't know. I joined a little bit late, but I don't know if it was already asked and answered. But how do we use the AWS cost calculator? Because I've been trying to figure that out, and it's just
You mean the
I'm
cost?
just so confused. The cost calculator for AWS.
Michael, isn't this the thing? Isn't it the proprietary tool is like designed to confuse you?
Yes, and I can't figure it out. I'm so confused.
Michael, you and I have talked about this, Michael.
Yeah. Are you talking about this calculator, or are you talking about the internal tools when you're logged in, like Cost Explorer?
I believe the link you just sent, that one.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, so this is good for creating estimates and to give you an idea of what you're going to pay. I generally don't trust this that much because prices fluctuate, in terms of like seeing and figuring out your costs inside your account. You can use Cost Explorer. There's a couple of other tools that are built in. It's kind of scattered though, and it almost seems like it's built like that on purpose. So you do have the insights, but like they make it very hard to track down where your costs are actually coming from, right? And they keep things separated, like for example by service and so on. You can do things like you can set up tagging and other things to help with that a bit, but it's hard sometimes to get a transparent answer on where your money's going. Kaju?
Hey, sorry, I had to chime in. I've been hit by this before, which is nobody tells you about ingress egress costs, and those will kill you if not managed properly. AWS makes a killing off of that. So more than instances, a lot of times, when I have a high ingress cost, it gets a little crazy. So.
Oh yeah, and actually, I think if I recall, New Relic or Datadog, one of them was a customer of AWS, and they actually left AWS purely because the ingress cost, it being in a monitoring company, the ingress cost was so high that they ended up leaving AWS. I don't remember which one of them it was, but yeah, that's definitely something that happens. And also like there's also costs for like inter-AZ, so in between like the different availability zones or between the different data centers, like the data being transferred. That's another hidden one that a lot of people don't realize. Yeah, there's like I said, it's almost like it's designed not to be transparent. You can like export your line item bill from them, and they'll give you like where every penny went. But it's also very hard to decipher. It's got lots of data that you don't actually need in it.
Yeah. I feel like cloud calculation is tough, just because of the spikes, and there's so many services and things like that. And they definitely don't make it easy, but I also don't want to go bare metal because the security risks in that is so crazy,
Oh yeah. And just the amount of time you're going to spend having to set up and maintain it all, and just in general, and when something does break or when you want to scale, if you're bare metal, you have what you have, it's going to take you time to get more boxes, with AWS, it's you just up your limit and boom, you're done,
Yep.
Maybe one question that came up earlier, Michael, can you speak to is what's a cost-effective way to start with, GPU accelerated machine learning and AI? Because I think a lot of folks, want to at least dip their toe in that water. And as you said, the EC2 computing price is pretty cheap if it's CPU only, but when you add that graphics card, exponentially more expensive. So do you maybe have some pointers for how, if you want a graphics card enabled server in the cloud, does AWS have sort of a cheap way to start with that versus the, $500 a month and up server, which might be what they default on, but you're going to get a heart attack when your first bill arrives.
Yeah, so there's a couple things you can do. So for the servers themselves, assuming you don't need something that's going to be running constantly, what I mean by that is you can have your instances come and go, and it'll continue to run and like auto scaling, right? Assuming something like that, generally in the past I've used like spot instances. For example, my EKS cluster that I have runs on spot instances, which is one of the ways you can get a discount on servers. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. One is reservations, which I never do for EC2 at least. Another way is a savings plan where you make a commitment with them for like 1 or 3 years and you get a discount. But the other way is spot instances, where spot instances, you're saying, I will use your spare capacity, at a much discounted rate, sometimes up to like 70% off even. Of the regular rate. That's for the instance though, not for the GPU. The downside to the spot instances is that they can yank that capacity back with a 2-minute warning basically at any time. And so you have to build that, you have to build around that if you're going to use spot instances, but that can save a lot of money. And what you can do is generally when you're using spot instances or buying spare capacity to keep the cost lower is you can spread it over like 10 or 15 different instance types that are very similar, right? And so that way, when they run out of spare capacity for one, it doesn't matter because you have 9 more. And then one of the interesting things about that is that the amount of spare capacity is per AZ, so like per their data center location, basically. And so when you have 10 different pools of instance types across like 3 different AZs, well, now you have 30 different pools of spare capacity to pull from, which is really nice. You're basically never going to run out of spare capacity. I don't know if spot rates apply to the GPUs though, but the instances at least you'll save money by doing that. But you do have to make sure that your application can handle it, you know, because again, they'll yank them anytime. Sometimes they'll run for days or even weeks without getting yanked. Sometimes your instance will come up and 10 minutes later it'll be yanked, you know. So you just have to be able to plan around that. But yeah, that is one of the good ways to lower those costs, at least on the
I think Amazon called it the G4 or something, which is the NVIDIA ones. And there were spot instances when I looked at this maybe a year or two ago. And like you said, you can save 70% off. So if you have some AI or machine learning loads can run sort of overnight in a region that you can take advantage of that pricing if, you know, you just need it sort of for a couple hours to crunch through some data analysis for you. But as you mentioned, Michael, you sort of need to design for that, because if they pull away your computing power at any time, you have like, what, a minute or two to shut down. Yeah,
and one of the nice things with Kubernetes and Amazon, like their EKS solution, is when you combine that with spot instances, it can actually see that warning, the 2-minute warning, and you can have another node spun up ahead of time. So that way you'll have it a new instance ready. Your stuff will get moved over. This is later on though, when you actually have like real infrastructure, right? Because you're not going to start off with Kubernetes and you know all this stuff, right? But yeah,
makes sense.
EKS is really good for this. That's one of the reasons why I like Kubernetes. It's very cheap to run if you use spot instances. If you need more stability, the other option too is a compute savings plan, where you would make a commitment, but then you're making a commitment, you know, and that's not necessarily always great, because if you're making a commitment and you don't have any traction yet, well, you know, now you're committed, and if you never gain any traction, well, you still have to pay, you know.
Yeah, you're prepaying for like 12 months of service at a discount, I think. When we were looking at that at a previous startup, you get a bit of a discount, but I think it's a 12-month commit minimum. So
yeah. So there's a 12 and a 3-year. So there's a 1 year and a 3-year commitment that you can make, and the 3-year commitment gives you, I think, around 50-60%. And you also get more off depending on whether you pay up front or not. So you can choose not to pay anything up front and make these commitments, but you're still committed and you're going to have to pay that, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So if you have 5 users, AWS is still billing you for that, reserving that hardware for you to use, even if you're not making use of it.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So sometimes it makes sense to like use spot instances for like a dev staging environment, stuff like that, you know, and then for production, you might have a compute savings plan and just use regular on-demand instances. That way you have that stability for production for your users. But you know, for dev and staging, you don't really care quite as much if there's a little flapping here and there, because it's dev and staging, right? So you can use spot instances there and not have to make as much of a commitment. So then you end up making a commitment for, you know, half of your infrastructure or a third of your infrastructure, instead of making a commitment for the whole thing, you know. And again, that's assuming you already have traction and everything. Yeah. Is there any other like questions or thoughts or anything?
Going once, going twice.
One call out maybe, Michael. Have you tried AWS Amplitude? I was actually funny enough, working on a proof of concept with a developer, and he had actually suggested testing that out. So I wanted to see if you had experience working with that, because that seems to take your source code, your GitHub repository, and then basically build it and host it. So you don't have to get into the weeds of, server management, access control lists, firewall settings, all that fun stuff that, DevOps likes to live and breathe. But have you used that service? It's called AWS Amplify.
Oh, Amplify. You know what? I think I used it at some point in the past. Yeah, but I not that much. It what you're saying though sounds a lot similar to one of their other services, which is Beanstalk, which is kind of the same thing. You upload your application bundle and it goes and creates the environment for you.
So one of the developers I was working with just on a prototype where I didn't really need it to scale, there's a free tier, and I'm going to have 5 users to start. And basically he said, okay, we'll put your source code in GitHub and it'll basically grab it, build it, and host your web app sort of, turnkey. And I think it's in the free tier too. So there's no charge to get that set up. And it's a little more accessible, I think, because it's, plug and play, versus having to manually sort of tweak a lot of these settings just to get your server on the internet and accessible to your early users. So it might be worth some folks to investigate. I hadn't heard about it before, but this dev that I was working with on a freelance basis just deployed something there and seemed to work okay.
Yeah. Actually, you mentioning that, that does bring up another good point for AWS. So there is a free tier. For your first 12 months, for example, you get, I think it's a T2. Is it still T2 or did they update it to T3 maybe? But you get one free server basically. It's not a very big one, but for getting started, you can use that. I think you still have to pay for storage and stuff like that though, so it's not entirely free. But it's something worth knowing about. There is a free tier. It can be pretty limited though.
Yeah, and I think you need to add a credit card for folks, just FYI. So your stuff can be within the free tier, but they want a billing method on file in case you go over or someone downloads or uploads gigabytes of data and suddenly they whack you with these secondary charges. But there is the free tier where you can basically, and they have a list buried on their website for folks on like what's free tier eligible when you're searching for a feature. So you get, a database or a server within that free tier category for sure. I just don't know if it's 24/7. It might go to sleep when it's not in use.
I think it's 24/7, but the catch is that it's pretty small, like a T2 micro or something, right? So,
okay.
Yeah, so it'll run what, a bare minimum small application, but it's not, it's not like a massive server they're giving you,
Yeah. No, that's a good point. So your AWS account, you do get a free usage tier to at least try out some of the services. And then I think in their catalog, when you find a service that you'd like to deploy, like database or compute, it will sometimes say, is this free tier eligible? Because not everything is, but the basics to get up and running in a limited capacity are often free tier. And I think same with Azure at Google Cloud. There's sort of a free tier where if you're just piloting something, you can get decent usage just to validate your idea without spending a lot.
And one thing too for AWS, like if you do start with AWS, something to think about too is just setting up like a private VPC and stuff like setting up your own network, not just using the defaults and stuff like that is kind of important. So doing a little bit of research and planning for that can also help, just because that's one of the best practices is to not use the default virtual private cloud, which is where all your servers and stuff will sit. Did want to bring that up just because a lot of people, they go in and they just launch something and then it'll work, but that's not the best practice. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Yep. Adam, maybe that's a follow-up webinar on like locking down your cloud infrastructure, because in the news there was a vibe-coded app that got hacked. the T app, I believe, and all their user data, gigabytes of it was just open to the internet, got compromised, and they're uploading like driver's licenses, personal photos, all that stuff. I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, or it happened in the last week or two. So
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I
maybe
saw
you
that
want,
even here. Yeah, I think it's pretty dangerous when you vibe code an app. People think that it's done and ready to deploy and professionally and securely, and this is really far away from the truth. I think it's really, really, I don't know. It's a really dangerous thing to do, just vibe code an app and just deploy it with a lot of user data, stuff like that. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do it at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any cyber experts in the group? Which is a good question.
For what topic specifically? I guess just for the security.
Yeah, just what Mark was saying. So just
Yeah, there's a lot of.
security.
Oh, sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, no worries. I was just saying that, just cybersecurity in general, but that would be, locking down your data is always a good thing to have. So if there's not, I can actually reach out to my network and see if there is. So if somebody wants to step up to the plate, send me a DM in the server.
There are some free tools that can help you avoid a lot of the worst mistakes, like Prowler. I'll send a link to it in the chat real quick for anyone that wants it.
Thank you.
And Adam, you don't really need military grade security. It's just it's just all these vibe coding things are just all open, and it's really, you just have to make sure that you close that box before you deploy it and expose all those data that you have, data points you have saved.
Yeah, and there's also other things you can do too. Again, this is all on the infrastructure side. The application side, I'm considering a separate thing, but infrastructure-wise, you can also do things like you can add web application firewalls in front of your application. That can help as well, stuff like that. And this is, again, it comes back to make sure your infrastructure is set up properly, because like I've seen some things that were pretty insecure in the past, where you have a developer that's very experienced with software but not very experienced with infrastructure. And so like one of the examples that I've seen in the past was they put their database instance in a public subnet, which basically meant it was, and they made it reachable to the open world, because this way they could easily run migrations and connect to it and so on.
Yeah,
do that. That's very bad. But yeah, stuff like that, making sure your networking is set up properly. Things that don't need to be exposed to the web should not be exposed to the web. Just stuff like that. And they're mistakes that are easy enough to make if you didn't know better.
Yeah, I think to Ray's point, the vibe coding apps by default, the settings are just really not locked down. So, if it's non-sensitive information, then you might be okay to start. But if you're vibe coding anything that involves personally identifiable info, you have GDPR in Europe, you have HIPAA, California Act for Privacy and Information. I forget what it's called. Don't vibe code anything in production if you have sensitive user data, because by default, the vibe coded app may work, but the database level security might be locked down. And that's what I think recently in the last 2 weeks was in the news with this popular app it was a social media app of some sort, and they just had a, I don't know, S3 storage bucket open to the world or something. And, all their sensitive data was in there, and that got hacked. So, just don't use vibe coding for production apps if you have any sensitive data. It's maybe the lesson learned of the hard way by this one startup.
Yeah, and I think honestly, I do think we're going to see more of these kind of things happening, just because, a lot of people are now vibe coding, but they don't have the understanding of how the applications are supposed to work. And so, yeah, them seeing the result that they wanted means it works, but that's not necessarily always a good thing. There's tons of things that can go wrong. I do a good bit of vibe coding, and I've seen some of the terrible spaghetti code that these AIs will write.
Yeah. Yep. Good point. And there's some YouTube videos for like White Hat where they basically say, here's an example of, a user form, and you put in SQL queries and it just says, oh, now you have admin permissions. And you watch this 5-minute video going, oh my gosh, like, it's a potential problem. As you said, if you just leave everything on default that the AI is trying to build.
Yeah,
So,
there's some other things you can do too to kind of help you a little bit with it. For example, GitLab will let you run code security scans automated every time you make a commit, basically, just as part of your CI. That's one thing that can make a nice difference there. A web application firewall, definitely, if you're going to run something in production anyway, you should have one of those.
yeah, maybe there's a security best practices follow-up that Michael, maybe, and Adam and someone else can speak to, because as I think there's too many instances of like data breaches, and even big financial companies. I won't call any out that were in the news, where like if you ever used a credit card at a big retailer, it got hacked, a mega bank, right? So even teams that have big engineering departments, sometimes it's that one setting somewhere where something is open to the world and you go, oops, but it's got really critical info in there. So maybe a best practices webinar would be awesome, even for the more experienced folks and even those getting started, just so they have a checklist, even if they're trying to engage with a security consultant at that point, to at least know what to ask about and separate, the good folks that are knowledgeable from the folks that are maybe throwing back buzzwords.
Well, thanks a lot for everybody for joining us today. All right, everybody have a great afternoon. We'll see you in the server.